jump in. Just to do the kind of formal intro for these lovely folks who are here. This is Rick Clark. He went to Carolina. He's a Carolina boy from Chapel Hill. Went to Georgia State, got a master's in education, and he's been at Georgia Tech for the last 16 years. He's the director of admission there. Susan here in the center of your screen. She's a native New Yorker. Went to St. Lawrence University, worked as the associate dean of admissions at Bates, got a master's in school counseling, spent 20 plus years as a director of college counseling at a college prep day and boarding school near Philly. Now she's an application reader and for a selective research university. She finds time to write. She loves sports when they're happening and is a mom of college junior twins who are home right now, as she mentioned. So let's jump right in, Rick. I'm going to start with you, ask you a few questions. What is your sense in terms of the impact that COVID-19 is having on the admissions process? And I'm curious specifically at Georgia Tech, but what are you hearing around, and around what's as you keep your ear to the ground, what's happening at other schools as well?
Yeah, sure. Well, right now, obviously, a big thing, that we're hearing from students and families is all of the variance that's occurring around the country and around the world as it relates to this spring semester. Pass-fail grades, EPs only testing a certain amount of content. Obviously, some school systems coming up with their own little variation on things. I heard one the other day that I hadn't heard before, which was, we're not going to give you a lower grade than you had when we stopped in-person instruction. You can only go up from there. So, it's just all over the map. And I think what we're thinking about, I think at Georgia Tech, and something I've heard from colleagues as well is, and I think during coronavirus, this is really important to be reminded of, yes, so much has changed around us, but I would argue in a lot of ways, the admission process and holistic admission in particular really hasn't changed. It's really a lot of the same things. And as we are planning, we were building our application for next year. This is something students would never know, but like April and early May is when you have to get your Common App or whatever application you're on sort of ready to launch. So everything can kind of be figured out during the summer and then launched in August. And we've been working on that. And, really, we were just having that conversation today a little bit as we were working on our application. Like, so much of the way we're going to review applications is the same. We're still going to look at what kids took. We're still going to look at their grade trends. This is going to be a weird little wonky, time, but I don't know that it's going to change a lot. And in fact, I kind of have a hope that it's going to push schools to be more holistic, right? Because they're going to need to rely on some other things, maybe a little less quantifiable, more sometimes on the essay or the recommendation or course choice, or what these kids did when they had a little time to themselves. I kind of think I'm actually really excited about what we're going to see in the next year or two coming out of this in the admission process. Yeah. And then just real quick, the other thing, of course, everybody every day is seeing is, the continued and escalated trend towards test score optional. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a constant conversation right now, not only with us, but just sort of around the country, is, okay, as these tests get canceled, what's the best thing for the institution and what is the best thing for the students? What's reasonable, given what we know and also what we don't know as we plan for the future. Yeah,
as Susan and I were prepping for this conversation a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that she said, which I thought was so wise, she said, we've got to invite students and parents to focus on what you can, control and stay informed about the rest. And I thought, wow, that's a really cool kind of variation on that serenity prayer, right? So we joke, this is like our college admission serenity prayer. One of the things in your book, which I'll talk about a little bit, you talk about is one of the things that folks can control is their attitude in this whole process. And you have this really cool metaphor of this like helicopter versus airplane thing, which I think is particularly apt right now. Will you share that lens for folks? Because I think it's a real good one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and to me, I think the biggest thing for students and families, honestly, throughout the entire admission experience is to stay open-minded. Because no matter where you're from and no matter what your family's background, we're all, especially, as young people, limited in our ability to see the big, vast, kind of beautiful tapestry that is American higher education. And so what I hope that students will, especially during this time, I think actually have an opportunity for is to ask of themselves bigger questions and get away from where, which sometimes it's the cart before the horse, and where, and very myopic. And if it's where, then it's always like, it feels like a tightrope, because if you mess this up and this goes awry, you're not going to sort of do everything you need to do to get to that one place. And so, that's kind of like when you go and you get a ticket, as we may, some of us recall, actual airplane rides. It's a direct flight, right? And you're going from one place to the next, and any little disruption along the way is seen as an annoyance. Whereas with a helicopter ride, like, you kind of go up and you get to look around and see things a little bit differently, and get some perspective, and you end up back in the same place. And I think that's the important thing, is that I hope students will be focused on who they are, why they want to go to college, the type of people that bring out their best, the type of environment that brings out their best. Those are broad, like high level questions. You're looking down on all of this instead of, I need to do this so I can get to this place. And so I hope people will focus and ask the question, not where I end up, but how I end up. And that just changes everything, because then it doesn't matter what statue you're in front of or what gates you walk through. The process within you, rather than this external process that everybody focuses so much on.
Yeah, I'm appreciating what you're saying. And by the way, y'all, we're going to hear from Susan soon. We're going to do Rick questions, and then we're going to do Susan questions. So just if folks are wondering, why is this dude talking before this woman? They've totally messed this up. You're right. And we'll get to Susan shortly. Susan's going to get in a little bit into some of the specifics of what folks can be doing. But another thing that I listen to you, Rick, I wonder if folks are out there thinking, yeah, sure, things are going to be the same, and that's cool, but really, like, aren't there some things that are going to be different? Like, aren't there any things that have changed, either from the admissions perspective or from the students' perspective? Like, can you give us any insight into that? Like, is there anything that's going to be different?
One thing I could see, so we're talking about juniors, because I think a lot is going to be different this summer for seniors, a lot. I mean, I think wait lists are going to go deeper into the summer. I think you're going to see, students asking for gap years maybe at a higher rate. But I know we're talking about juniors. And the thing that I would expect to see, because of this spring semester from a grades standpoint, is schools being probably a little bit more intentional about asking for midterm grades, especially with their early action and early decision. So for instance, Georgia Tech and a lot of schools around the country, will have an October 15th or a November 1 deadline. And then they'll put decisions out in, either December or potentially in January. And we often do that really almost solely based on everything through the end of junior year. Well, if there's a question mark or an asterisk, let's say, on the spring of the junior year, I could absolutely see schools, and Georgia Tech probably being one of those, that will say, we want to see that, report card or midterm, whatever it is, so that we can use that also to make a decision in early action, early decision. I would tell juniors that might be a difference from years past. It's not to say no schools did that, but the minority of schools did that in their EA or ED process. So that would be something I would expect to see change.
One of the questions has come in from one of the folks in the chat box. What advice do you have for seniors? Say there's seniors on this call. Say they've been accepted to a few schools, but they can't visit. What do they do?
Yeah. So for making that final decision, I mean, and just a couple things in general. One of those I will say, and here's a positive, here's a good thing that's come out of this. And frankly, I feel guilty that we haven't done a better job of this in the past. And that is, making more content available to students. I mean, a lot of schools around the country, very few schools around the country had really robust virtual tours, or live or recorded, information sessions. And a lot of the thought process on that was they wanted people to come to them to get the content. And so I think what you're finding, if you're a senior right now, you're actually, first of all, finding the ability to get that information easier. And instead of having to drive around, travel around, spend all that time and money, I mean, gosh, you could hit 4 schools in a day. right? At different parts of the country. So I think that that's one thing. And that's also something that will be changing in the year ahead, is that we are not going away from what we've just learned through this, right? Crisis brings some good things with it. And I think you're going to see a lot of schools investing heavily in that virtual reality, kind of platform. The other thing I would tell students is I would tell them to go and use social media in a little bit of a different way. Admission people like me put out very infographic-y, glossy, shiny, everything is great stuff, right? Some of which has value. But if I'm looking to play club soccer in college and I'm down to my last 3, I'm going to go find the Snapchat or Instagram of those club soccer programs at those schools, or those things I'm interested in, because those people running those accounts are not marketing to you. They are just telling the real deal story. It's kind of like the old advice of, not old, but like the school newspaper, still very valid. I mean, go read those, man, because they're not trying to recruit students. They're talking about all the problems at the school. They're talking to each other, and that's community, that's authenticity. And man, there's so much value in that, to know these are my people or these are not my people.
Yeah. And I'll open it up just for folks in the chat box. Feel free to post a couple questions. We're going to spend about 5 more minutes here with Rick, and then we're going to let him go because he's a super busy human he's actually got another presentation in a little bit. Another question that popped in that I'm interested in, if you had to speculate, actually, this is my question, then I'm going to ask the other one. When you think about how you mentioned how things might change for the future, what do you think, what changes do you think might this whole time bring? Potentially for the good, you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of those two things from an access standpoint. And I mean, this is access period. Even if it's a high income family, it's just access to information, right? I believe that through what we've learned is that our staff can be incredibly effective remotely, and we can get to a lot of people. And we have a tomorrow night, we're doing a collaborative program with the University of Georgia and Georgia State. We have 4,000 people registered for this. I mean, these are, the ability to get information out there and to interact through some of these forums online. We've learned through this that's very powerful. And students are, just as you can see in this very active chat you have going on here, are hungry for information. They will show up. It's convenient, and we can get good information out there. The other thing I would say is from a testing standpoint, I really think that this is also going to end up being positive, because if they can build in good test security, which we've seen happen over the years in a variety of other testing situations, then no longer do you have some of the barriers. I mean, and you think about like kids in mainland China. I mean, they've got to fly to Singapore and Hong Kong to take these tests, and that actually puts up walls and barriers, and that's happening domestically too. So if we can do in-home testing with security, and find a better model, it actually could be at a lower cost, and I think actually decrease some stress, right? Part of the stress of the test sometimes is having to get up and go into this environment and look around you at all these other people and everyone else is nervous. I actually will be very interested to see what this brings in terms of, all right, I mean, I'm wearing my flip-flops right now. You can't see that, but I'm giving a presentation of my flip-flops, Right. If you can take a test in your flip-flops, if you can take a test in a kind of comfortable, controlled environment, that's really positive. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. I've got one here from someone named Liz asking, and you're going to get an essay question from me. Are you looking to see essay questions on life during COVID, or should students stay away from that topic? What are your initial thoughts on this?
My thought is, how could you not write about it? I mean, gosh, I'm 45. I mean, it's the biggest thing that's ever happened in my life. I mean, if you're 17, of course it is, right? So I think that here's what I think. Kids naturally are going to want to write about this. I think it's incumbent upon colleges to ask the question in a way they want to read about it.
Right.
And so here's a question that I want to ask. And we've kind of debated this today in our creation of the application, because one of those things is what questions you're going to ask. Right. I want to ask kids, I'm really interested to know, and if we don't ask it, I guarantee a bunch of schools will. something along the lines of, what did you realize during this time that you, like, what did you give up? What did you realize, like, you had sort of just only done because it was just something everyone else around you did, or you kind of figured out during this time, like, that's really not my passion. That's not what I love. And then similarly, like, what did you pick up? Like, just literally today, my son, we went on a walk. I was telling you, he's 11. We went on a walk before this, and he was like, you know what? I mean, this is unsolicited. He said, I really want to use this time to learn another language. That just totally came from him. He's like, I want to, get on Duolingo with Spanish. I did not plant that seed at all. And so I think it's gonna be fascinating to read that. And, genuinely, that's what colleges want. And I'm sure Susan's going to talk about this too. I know you know this from your work. Like, that's what we really want to know, is like, what do you, not what you think we want to hear, like, legitimately. And I think this is like a perfect litmus first test for that. Like, what did you stop doing and what did you start doing? That's a great indicator about who you really are and what your goals and dreams really are.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're right. And I think that Common App is talking about putting something in there, so that everybody will have a chance to, kind of like a mini coronavirus additional info section. There's a really specific one coming in. This I don't know if this will be the last one, but I like the way this is phrased. And it's going back to a topic that we've already touched on, but I want to ask it in this way. Do SAT scores still matter?
Yeah. You know what? I think they do and will to certain schools. And they also do and will in a lot of public school systems. Is my sort of both short and long prediction. There's no doubt that the test score optional trend has again accelerated, and I think will continue to. And here's what I am also excited about. Because when you work in a public system, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I mean, you've got legislators, you've got boards of regents, right? You've got a lot of people who have long-standing beliefs, sometimes and sometimes not based in data. And what we have here is an opportunity, if we have a bunch of cancellations where kids couldn't take this, to actually enroll a group of students without tests. And it's a case study. And you're seeing that come out. I think Cornell today came out and they said they're going to go test score optional, and they made it clear it's for a year. But here's what I believe is, if Cornell enrolls a group of students without tests, they do really well using all these other factors we talk about, then in the future, well, at that particular place, if you have the data to back it up, then no, they don't. But in other places, and understanding the ecosystem of American higher education, right? There's all kinds of different places out there. I do believe there will still be a place for testing, but I do think this is a great opportunity for us to push, both ACT and College Board on, like, a better test, and a test that's really more helpful to colleges and to students.
Yeah, I'd love to get deeper into that with you. And well, let me, I'm going to ask a mini question, then I'm going to ask you one last question. But where does Georgia Tech stand on that right now in terms of, the test optional thing? What's your sense of that?
Yeah, so I mean, we want to be able to have a good conversation, again, based in data with our Board of Regents. And again, as families are out there looking, what's been interesting, just quick tangent, when all of the coronavirus broke, a lot of schools immediately changed their deposit deadline from May 1 to June 1. And I thought that was a really great indicator to families to just as a reminder, like, we're not all the same,
right.
And the stuff we mail kids all looks the same, but we're not. We operate differently. And so to me, it's a reminder to families, like, you need to ask questions about this school and help them, understand why they're making the decisions they do. Why do they have the factors they do in place to make admission decisions? And so for us, I think the answer is, we want to be able to have that conversation with our Board of Regents. And I believe as more tests get canceled leading up to an October 15th deadline, it's likely that'll be a conversation that's easier to have. But it'll be made at a system level, most likely.
Rick and his co-written an awesome book called The Truth About College Admission that really helps situate this whole process. It's sort of like, here's how to think about it. It's written for students and for families. Here's how to think about this whole college process with some really good practical advice. The last question I have for you, Rick, before I let you go is, what do you want students and parents to know right now?
I think the biggest thing is, I mean, literally, I have a barricade by this door so that my kids don't come busting in here, and like, I just hope people, like, I hope families are reminded that these are people making decisions, right? And we are living through this exact same thing with them, right? People's circumstances may be different, but like, we do get it. Like, you didn't get to play tennis in the spring of your junior year, like, neither did we, and that's one thing, is that we are people, and that honestly, the amount of grace that's going to be extended, the amount of flexibility I think that's going to be given, is without a doubt going to be there. And here's why, and this is the last thing I'll say: colleges need students. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but like right now, as you're reading the news and you're seeing all these huge financial losses, what else do you need to demonstrate that statement is true? And who knows what the future looks like with embassies and consulates being able to issue visas. But we know there's a birth dearth coming in 2025. There's a declining number of high school graduates. Now more than ever, colleges need students, and they are going to be heavily pursued in the year ahead. They're going to have, I think, more choices and options than ever before. And so it feels right now very uncertain. And I get that, because I feel that way too. I don't have all the answers. I want them, don't have them. But I hope kids and families will be reminded right now that, yes, this is a brief disruption moment in time, but the long term of it is they're going to have a lot of great choices and options. And hopefully the press around this only reinforces that as accurate.
That's awesome. And you've beautifully set up for the first question that I'm going to ask Susan here in a minute. Okay. So, Rick, I appreciate your time. Have a beautiful rest of your night. And thanks for your work. And thanks for writing an awesome book.
Thanks so much. Good to see y'all. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Be well.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rick. Bye-bye.
Right. Susan, he totally set us up for our first question.
Amazing.
So, yeah. What are you seeing in terms of, what do you think is, I'm going to kind of segue off that last question, is like, in terms of, what do you feel like it's important for students and parents to understand in terms of how things are shifting based on COVID-19?
Well, the fascinating thing about this dynamic is, even though you may have had an older brother or a sister and watched them go through the process, as a junior, you've never gone through this before. Right. So everything is brand new for you. It's the adults really who are freaking out, because they have had an understanding of this process like every other process, because they have either worked in admissions or they've parented older children. And what we really need to do is make sure juniors understand that they have a process to create for themselves, and that hasn't changed. Right. It's got some aspects, some satellites around it that are in the minds of the adults. Yeah. But for them, it's the same as it always has been, Ethan. It's their process to create, to nurture, to own, and to be in control of.
Yeah.
And one of the most important things we can say to juniors is don't give the control away. Don't give it away to the testing agencies. Don't give it away to the mythical admissions people. Yeah. Don't give it away to the rankings. Own it for yourself. And that will give you not only a sense that your outcomes will be what they should be, but it'll give you, like you were saying, a little bit of serenity in what feels like a rapidly changing landscape.
I have this feeling that some folks are going to be thinking, juniors are going to be thinking that they're going to be at a disadvantage somehow. What is your sense of that?
I think it's the colleges that feel they're at a disadvantage. I'm so glad Rick mentioned that, because we think of them as being these, stalwart, unchanging institutions. But colleges are desperately concerned about the incoming freshman class, the first year class for next year, the variables there aren't going to be known for some time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very disturbing. The financial fragility of institutions, we may think of them as, billion-dollar, monolithic institutions, but we know they're more fragile than that, than they let on. The disruptions that they're experiencing are, they go back to before the coronavirus. A year ago, they were facing the admission scandal and the extortion and bribery that came out of Varsity Blues. We watched our National Professional Association lay down our code of ethics in the fall. We watched the Harvard affirmative action lawsuit prevail. And then we got hit by a worldwide pandemic. And juniors out there, this is your worldview will never be the same. Mm-hmm. Your personal experience of your life right now as kids in high school has been altered, not permanently, probably not permanently, but it's an altered state that, as Rick said, will return. The important thing is that you own it. You acknowledge that you're blessed in many ways. Some of you have suffered terrible losses. Yeah. And we may be all in this together, but we are not all in the same boat.
One of the things I love in our conversations leading up to this that you've talked about is focusing on the things we can control. So let's get practical. What are some of the things that juniors and their parents, feel free to talk about students or parents or both, what are some things that they can focus on and they can actually do, like right now in April, what is it, April 22nd, 2020,
That's right,
in order to set themselves up for the journey ahead?
Well, first of all, as a family unit, parents, I know you're out there listening, as well as a lot of high school students, but let's create a family dynamic around this process for your junior right now that is celebratory, it's affirmative, it is letting your junior right where he or she is right now feel empowered to move forward and not crippled by the messages that they're getting from the media and the testing agencies that somehow this is all against them. It's not. It's what I would suggest parents.
What does that look like? Like, what are some cool practices that you've seen? Like things that parents do, it's like, ooh, that's a good idea. Like, what are some of those practices?
Be a book club. Start a book club at home. Take Rick Clark's book, The Truth Behind College Admission, or Ethan, you've written brilliantly on this subject in a way that's both philosophical and very practical.
I didn't pay her to say that, by the way.
No, you didn't. But get a good book. Ask an older friend maybe what piece of writing about college admissions. Maybe it was some articles. Maybe it was a book they read that was inspiring and informative for them. And read it together. Parents, kids, read, discuss, maybe have a Zoom call with a neighbor, with a junior in high school, and start a book club. I think that can be an enormously positive way to react to good information and make it personal.
What about money? What you mentioned one of our conversations about limits and stuff. What kind of conversations that also should folks be having?
Well, this is a hard one because I've worked with thousands of high school families in the past, and the money conversation is often veiled in language like, your job is to get into college, our job is to pay for it. And right. This is a beautiful sentiment to have. It was the sentiment my parents took with me many years ago, and I totally believe them. And when I picked an expensive private university, they swallowed hard and they carried through on their promise. That was when college cost a lot less than it does now, right? And
right.
I think the best thing, parents, that you can do is to have an honest conversation insofar as your comfort level allows, about any limits that you have for your child's college search. And I think that's something that is utterly different about your experience as a family of a junior this year, is the driving factors are shifting.
Yeah.
And cost, because of loss of income in many families and the hit that many families' investments have taken, let alone the fact that some folks are out of work, they've been furloughed, you name it. And the affordability issue, being averse to debt
right.
at this time, accepting positive debt, but being averse to excessive debt is more important now than ever, especially in the parent loan part of the world.
Yeah.
The other thing is distance from home. Rick alluded to it in that colleges that have been recruiting internationally and nationally are going to start looking closer, because the general feeling out there is that kids are going to be staying a little closer to home, perhaps not flying to their college destination, that this situation has raised a lot of uncertainty about, is it really necessary? Is it necessary to attend a college on the other side of the country or a plane flight away in the event that there is an emergency? And that could be appendicitis, for Pete's sake. A lot of us have lived through those situations.
Mm-hmm.
Where suddenly, you need to be a team again.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think, parents, you do yourselves and your kids a big favor to not promise something that you're not going to deliver on. You can't say, sweetheart, you're in the driver's seat. It's your life. It's your college decision. We're behind you 100%. And then later on down the line, suddenly say, well, we didn't really think that you wanted to go to New York City to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
Or we actually didn't think you were going to get into that college in Alaska or wherever, and then pull the rug out from underneath their feet. Mm-hmm. This time and how you relate as parents and kids is a blueprint for your relationship with your kids as they move forward into adulthood. Yeah. And what you want to do is create a foundation of trust and mutual respect and an appreciation for each other's limits.
Yeah. Give us an arc of the sort of timeline of, because as you mentioned, a lot of the students are going through this for the first time. What are the things and when should they be doing them? So like, it's April. What should they be doing right now? What should they start doing over the summer? Give us some of those nuts and bolts stuff.
Absolutely. There are two things, juniors, I think you should do while you're lying in bed tonight and looking at your ceiling. And say to yourself, am I doing my best academic work? Or am I feeling burnt out by this whole darn online learning situation? Where's my integrity in this current academic situation?
Right.
I'm having this conversation with my college age kids. It's hard.
Right.
It's hard, especially once the pass-fail situation raises its head. It's, well, do I do just enough to get by if my grades aren't going to hurt me? Or am I going to really do this for myself?
Yeah.
And for my own belief in myself that I'm going to finish really strong. So number one, finish strong.
Right.
Do it for yourself. If even if no one's looking, study like no one's watching.
And then in terms of, go ahead.
Thing, though, Ethan, that I think you should do right away, juniors, is think about what you've chosen to take next year for your academic classes. And something I've learned the last couple of years reading applications, after being in a high school setting forever and beating on kids unmercifully about this issue, that not personally, working at a Quaker school prohibits certain violent expressions of concern. But reading applications is the lack of alignment that some kids fall into with what they're professing their academic interests are, what they want to study in college, what they're passionate about,
right.
where they see their life taking them. A lack of alignment with then what they're actually taking senior year. Remember, senior year may be the first year you actually have some discretion over how rigorous your course program is and the specific classes that you're eligible to take. So you've got to now more than ever prove to the colleges you're going to apply to next year that you're serious about your academic interests, and that you also are ready to work your pants off to get where you want to go.
Right. One of the things that folks have talked about is like the importance of, doing virtual visits. And there's some great sites. We'll send out some resources later. Campus Reel, REEL, is one of my favorite sites for doing these kind of virtual visits. But one of the questions that I have, Susan, is like, what about for the summer? So a lot of time, in a lot of situations, it's been canceled. I thought I was gonna do this cool internship, or I thought it was gonna work. Any advice for what they should do in planning, thinking about the summer?
Well, remember, summer has not been canceled. Stuff has been canceled. All the organizational framework, perhaps,
right,
what is going to be shifting in different ways. Mm-hmm. But you, juniors, and your interests, your thoughts about what you want to study later in life, and perhaps what you want to do in the world, none of that's been canceled.
Right.
It's just been handed to you, not on a silver platter, but it's been handed to you almost like a gift that you can unwrap and hold close to you. This will, with any luck, never happen again. You will never be given the gift of time and independence. And I want you kids really to look at it that way. And parents, please know that colleges get this. And like Rick said, there's a sense on the college side that this is going to be a wonderful way to peel away some of the advantages and trappings that have glamorized this process in some ways, and that they're going to be getting to the heart of these applicants in a little bit of a different way. And whether you decide you're going to, do a virtual online babysitting service, or you're going to find a way to volunteer with the elderly who are suffering deeply at this time, whether you're going to write the novel that you started in 7th grade and you put aside because you figured it didn't matter, that no one would appreciate it.
Yeah.
There's so many incredible things that you could do that when people read your application will bring you to life in a way where the colleges will say, wow, this is an inventive, an ingenious, a creative person. There's some other things you can really work on too when you look at the applications of the colleges that interest you. How are you going to bring those qualities of mind and heart? How are you going to make the invisible visible to the people who aren't going to, get to do a real handshake? They might do a virtual one.
Right.
Think about a resume, not my entire life in resume form, because that's actually what the application is, right? If you look at a common application or a coalition application, it really is just a giant structured resume. But use a resume or an artist's statement or a portfolio to showcase what you're learning about yourself and what you've spent oodles and oodles of time doing, not because somebody told you to do it, but because you told yourself to do it.
One question that's coming in from the chat from a few folks, it's a bit of a tangent, but a bunch of folks have asked it, is will current seniors who are taking gap years in 2020 impact current juniors in the admissions process? Or what is your best guess on how the current seniors taking that gap year, how that's going to impact, what the trickle down is going to be, if you had to theorize on this?
Colleges right now are struggling with about 16 different scenarios of what college may look like in the fall. Those of you who read Inside Higher Ed, there was a brilliant article. 15 fall scenarios that that colleges are trying to figure out what it's all going to look like in the fall, ranging from business as usual,
Right.
to all sorts of varieties of the same. Kids are thinking about two things. Am I going to be on campus in the fall, or am I not going to be on campus in the fall? And is my absence from campus going to be required or voluntary?
Yeah.
So this could be a year when suddenly it occurs to you to take a year off.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that that's premature unless you've got a great idea as to how you would want to spend your time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that could be something that would be interesting to explore. Colleges, the few that have commented, Ethan, have said, we're always going to honor what an admitted student asks to do.
Yeah. And what do you say? And I think some of the juniors are probably freaking out thinking, well, what is that? Is that going to crowd us out of all of our spots? And I imagine on our heuristic of what are the things you can control and what are the things you can't control? It seems to me that this kind of falls in the land of like things that you can't control. So given that, what can juniors do? It seems to me that this points to like something that you and I talk a lot about is developing the balanced college list.
Right.
How do you make sure that you've got a wide range of places, figuring out what you're interested in and developing a wide range of, schools so that it doesn't squarely depend on getting into X or Y school, right? That there may be fewer spots. Talk to us a little bit about that in terms of as students are beginning to develop their list, what's some of the advice that you give to students in terms of how to think about their college list?
Well, I think thinking about selectivity is really just one of the factors. And it's a very important factor, and it's a little slippery in that juniors right now don't necessarily have, much more than the admissions statistics or average GPAs and test scores from the colleges, and all that. You might help a junior look at a college and say, "Ooh, I think this is going to be a reach," or "I think this is an awesome fit for me. I bet they'll admit me." You have to start with kind of large, if you look at some of the stuff that's coming out with the acceptance percentages for this actual class that has just been admitted to colleges, and the number of colleges that are below that 10-15% acceptance rate, every student on the planet should say, that's a reach for me. Even if you have, absolutely, even if you have straight A's and a lot of advanced courses and great scores and you rock at, robotics or debate or something, those schools should always be in a category on your list of pie in the sky. But, if you're interested in those schools, you do your best, you give it your best shot, you go for it. They've got to admit somebody. This is what kids don't like to hear me say that, but, you'll be in the running, but go for it. But the most important part of your list is the colleges that are going to offer you what you want most.
Yeah.
And to develop that list now, juniors, is so critically important of the things you must have, that they're simply not negotiable. When life was less complicated, when I looked at colleges, and parents, I'm sure a lot of you would agree with me, it was basically my parents telling me they didn't want me flying to college, right? And I got a lot of mileage out of that one. And I had a lot of academic interests, science and foreign languages. Well, pretty much everybody offers that, right? So that it wasn't like biomolecular engineering or something that there's a short list of schools, and go to College Navigator, you can get the list of where those degree programs are. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ride horses. That's what I wanted to do. And so you put things together. It hasn't changed that much now, except you've got to be smarter than that about those priorities that are driving your search. And that's what parents and kids need to lay it out on the table. You've got to make sure you're looking at colleges that are going to offer you all of those priorities. Your second list is the list of preferences. And those are things that in an ideal world you'd have also, but you're willing to be flexible.
Right.
About them.
One of the things, I'll just jump in here with a little resource that we put together for helping students put together a list. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. Here's a little guide. I'll email this out to folks. But when it comes to y'all talking, trying to figure out what is it, what are my preferences? What do I even want in a college? There's a really cool resource called Coursava that students can get a free account on. And in about 10, 15 minutes, you can go through this program and figure out, what do I want in a college? Once you've got that, and there are some other resources here that I'll share on this blog, but there's some other resources like your planning values assessment, your self-knowledge questionnaire that'll help you give a sense of really what you're looking for. And then when you're trying to sort of plan out what are those different schools that I'm interested in, I really love College Express. Is a great site that when you hop into it, you'll see something like, for example, they sort of by lists. So like colleges with great programs in film and television. And you'll see like a big list of different schools. Let's say if you're interested in film and television, and you can click on, say, Loyola, and it'll tell you the other lists that school is on. And so it'll give you lots of specifics in terms of, oh, here's what this school is known for. And then that leads to other things, potentially other schools that you might be interested in. And my advice is to take those schools and put them on what I call, your college list research tracker, which looks like this. And it involves just basically putting those schools that you're applying to and figuring out, and there's a little place to do that, like what is the chance of acceptance at that school. Choosing my recommendation, or our recommendation, is to choose one wild card, a few reaches, a few maybes, and a few likelies, maybe 8 to 10 schools. And then there's a place here where you can map out exactly what your research is looking like. So it's a way to kind of keep it all in one place. And then once you've done that, I've got the second tab here that's like your specific essay tracker, where you can basically put all the prompts when those are officially released in August. And you can more effectively, I think, figure out, okay, this is the scope of work that I have to do. And note, this is going to be like a moving target, but this is just one way to sort of organize this stuff. So anyway, just wanted to jump in with some more practical stuff. Tell me, Susan, what are some more practical stuff that folks can, that students and parents can really focus on to help shape the next few months as they're kind of going through this process?
Well, I think, and I'm so glad you showed that organizational framework, Ethan, because that's so incredibly important. Everybody comes up with their own spreadsheets and their own data points, but keeping it simple and finding some tools, some specific websites and calendars and things that really work for you is important, because there's so much information out there right now. And I'll give a plug for the College Essay Guide, College Application and Admissions Timetable. And kids, you can take that and tweak it for your own sense of your schedule, but it kind of lets you jump in where you're at right now and see, okay, these are good things that I should be doing now. I should have some stuff done. Here's where I go next. It's really important to have a bit of a roadmap to keep yourself on track. And parents, you may need to cut your kids a little slack when it comes to this, in that I've known some families where they actually had to sign contracts, and the kids said, I will only talk to you about my college plans on Sunday nights from 7:30 to 9, because the parents were being helped in an effort to be helpful, being too aggressive.
Yeah.
And not really understanding that every junior and senior is on their own developmental timetable for this. Mm-hmm. It's really not possible to be late at this point as in a junior's life.
Right.
Other families do very well, and my family did this. We talked all the time about stuff. We just had a low-key way of sharing stories and articles, and always with an inspiring goal.
Yeah.
A way to keep it empowering. So you can talk about this process incessantly if you want to, if it's from a place of empowerment, right? Yeah. If it's not, then you got to put some limits. You got to put some limits on it. So what I would do is make some virtual visits. Families, you're going to think this sounds weird, but pretend you're getting in a car together. Mm-hmm. And have the TV there or the big computer screen. Parents maybe one of you sits next to your child, the other one in the back seat, and go on a visit, go on a virtual tour. Let the junior ask the questions. Parents can practice having discussed ahead of time what they hope they learn, but not necessarily interfering in the student's experience of that tour. When it's done, you can get out of the car, get an iced tea, and sit in a circle and say to each other, Junior, my dear junior son or daughter,
Right.
tell us what your feedback is. What'd you think? What did you like? What did you dislike? Parents, you don't get to even really contribute that until you begin to reflect off of what your child says. And believe me, that's an excellent family dynamic to build, because everybody gets there to contribute their 2 cents. But the junior rising senior gets to contribute their 25 cents
Right.
because it is more valuable.
So let's play a game. We've got about 8 minutes. I want to do rapid fire. Let's answer as many of these questions as we can. I'm going to throw one at you. Let's give ourselves like 15 seconds to answer these, and let's just jam through it, see how many we can get through.
Okay.
So I'll take the first one. Jenica asks, what schools allow test optional? Jenica, go to fairtest.org and you'll see a great list. It's updated continually. You get the next one, Susan. What should I do about teacher recommendations? And give me your 15 to 30-second answer. What advice would you give on teacher recommendations?
Well, first thing is make sure you understand from your school counselor how they want you to handle this. They may have already shared that information with you about how you should go about making those requests. And most schools use some kind of web-based platform where you enter a request, the teacher responds, and that's eventually where the teacher uploads the letter. So that's all, meets up in Common App or the whatever application you're using. My best advice on who to ask, go for 2 from teachers who've taught you in your junior or senior year. One should be related to your academic interests that you're putting down on your college application, where it says, what are you interested in studying? You should have a teacher, whether it's STEM, whether it's humanities or social sciences, get some alignment there between the teacher and the skill set that the college is going to want to hear about. And remember, kids, it doesn't matter if you didn't get an A+ in the class. A teacher who has seen you struggle, meet challenges, and work through stuff generally writes a better letter of recommendation, or at least one that's more useful to the colleges. You can take my word for that. The second letter should focus on verbal skills, reading, writing, presentations, communications. So if you have one letter that's analytical, problem-solving oriented, have one that's reading, writing oriented.
Great. Let's see. Do you think EAE, you got to give a quick one for this, because we're going to get through 30 of these in 6 minutes, Susan. Okay. Do you think EA and ED deadlines will be pushed back from November 1st?
Maybe.
Yeah, great. We'll have to see. This is one of those things that we don't know. Should juniors still try to take the SAT and ACT?
My feeling is if you're prepared and you're likely to apply to colleges that will still require them, then the answer is yes.
Yes, love it. Would students, I'll take this one, would students that are able to pay up become more valuable to colleges? I think, yes, that's true in many cases, and it depends on the school. But for some schools who are really struggling, yeah, I think, full pay kids, they keep the lights on. Here's one for you, Susan. Will colleges take at-home test scores seriously like APs?
Maybe.
Yeah, that's one of those maybes.
There are schools coming out now. They're starting to release their opinion about that. So keep an eye on it.
Yeah. Ooh, this is a tough one. I don't know if you can answer this one. Might tuition prices change?
They're not going to change if you're studying online, because online delivery for a college is just as expensive as in-person delivery.
Yeah.
But you will, if you're not in residence, then you won't have room and board and other fees.
Yeah. I'll take this next one. Noor asks, how will colleges look at schools that utilize a pass-fail grade during this time? I mean, my sense is that there's so many schools that are going pass-fail right now that it's just another thing. And so in terms of like the holistic stuff that they're considering, it's just one more data point. So you're not going to get penalized. It's a pass-fail. If you just pass everything, but then, you're not going to get penalized for it. Let's see. Any advice? Ooh, any advice on, that's a tough one. Whew. let's see. Someone asked, what is a good timeline to utilize? So I'm ready to apply for college. Eliana, I've pasted it 3 times in the chat box. So you can check that. It's the College Application Hub. Will your GPA, this is for you, Susan, and AP test scores be more important due to SAT cancellations?
Colleges are going to put together their own amalgam of credentials, just like they always have. I think the tricky part of this is for colleges that have not been holistic in the past. What are they going to do when scores are out of the equation? And they're the ones that are struggling now with laying down test scores for next year, but I'm seeing more and more doing it. So they clearly have a plan for how they are going to assess. I think it's not going to be so much GPA. The number is not as meaningful as kids think it is. It's going to be the academic program over a period of years, courses selected, work done outside the classroom that supports the development of those academic interests and career aspirations. It's going to be, I don't think it's going to be as different, just as Rick said, it's not going to be as different as everybody thinks it might be. Colleges are going to work with what they have in the most honest possible way.
Yeah. This one's coming up a bunch. Do you think there will be less merit scholarship money available for the class of 2021 due to financial crises created by COVID-19?
I have not heard that.
Yeah, I haven't heard that either, but maybe. And again, I want to say to folks, like, this might fall under the realm of things that you can't control. And
right.
So, you know, in the world of things that we can control, here's my advice. And this is linked to another question that folks are asking is like, how do I get motivation during this time? So part 2 of this webinar, we notice we haven't talked at all about essays or really the nuts and bolts of the application. My sense is like a way to get really motivated is to know exactly what you need to do in order, like, you know, at each step of the process. And what I'm going to map out for you next week in part 2 of this is like a really specific action items. And I find that when I know exactly what I need to do, suddenly it's like, okay, I can kind of, my sleeves are already rolled up, but I can kind of roll my sleeves up and get to work. So one of the things, kind of like I was mapping out for y'all earlier of like, do this, then this, then this, that's what I'm going to map out for y'all. And, you know, it's going to, like, I'll talk about application and also talk about essays. Mostly, just in case folks can't make that one, I don't think you should be focused too much on essays right now. I think, like Susan said, we need to be focused on finishing strong, making sure your grades are awesome. But I'll talk to you about how to begin thinking about your essays and what I think is a good, you know, approach, a good way to start thinking about that. So my short answer, actually, it's not short now, it's a minute. I went over my time, but it's have a specific set of action items, and that specific action item is what, you know, is what I'm going to give you in the next webinar. Let me find one more here.
At that point, the one thing I should have said that juniors should be doing right now is journaling.
Yeah.
If you're not a journal writer, juniors, start now. Start making notes on a Google form, you know, and just start writing down your thoughts and feelings, your ideas, your concerns. It'll be helpful to you later on to go back and be able to draw on those ideas and those feelings.
Okay, here's the last one for you, Susan. We got to do a rapid fire one because we're at time. So one of the early suggestions given was to stay informed. We said, focus on what you can control, stay informed. What are some ways that students can stay informed during this process? What are some news outlets, resources that you'd suggest students use? If you had to pick, say, 3 or 4.
Oh dear, you go first.
Okay, I've got this. Susan and I are doing I think a pretty good job of, like, if you're on the email list, I'm pumping out constantly information on here are the shifts that we're seeing.
Right.
In terms of test prep, I think Compass Prep is doing a really nice job of putting information out on the testing side of things. In terms of test optional, I would go to fairtest.org if that's something that you're stressed about. If you're stressed about in terms of like shifts in terms of the application, stay on our email list. That's something that we're going to be focused on and doing webinars out, you know, throughout the next few months on, and putting together. I mean, my job, I think, is like to put together resources on stuff. What else, Susan? What else? You read a ton. What are you looking at?
I really like the Making Caring Common website out of Harvard. They're writing about character building through the college admission process. You know, changing the lens on, you know, how we should come to know ourselves. I think that's great stuff. That to me just balances out a lot of the other things, but I agree with what you've shared, Ethan.
Yeah.
Inside
Cool.
higher ed to me is, I don't know if kids can subscribe to that, but I would say look into it if you're looking at what's on the minds of the colleges on everything from endowment to admissions. It's a great news outlet.
All right, I said last question, but I'm going to do one more because Alivi said, "Oh my God, please say something about international students." How do you see this impacting international students, Susan? What would you say in terms of, what advice would you give to them? Is there something that they should be doing or thinking about differently?
I think certainly thinking about how this situation has changed their worldview. This may completely have changed kind of the angle that they're looking at in terms of why they would want to come to the United States for their college education. And I think for everybody, whether you're domestic in this country now or you live abroad, regardless of your nationality, your worldview will never be the same. And I think international students have to think really hard about that lens. I think we don't know enough yet about getting visas and being able to come to the United States in the fall. I think there's a lot of talk about that likelihood diminishing for the fall. But everything I know, I get out of Inside Higher Ed or the New York Times, right? Those are my two trustworthy outlets. But I don't want to scare international students and say, right, if you're a junior now, you're not going to be able to come as a senior. I'm more worried about the kids that have been admitted for the fall. Yeah. And either may have trouble getting visas or that we're just not going to be, having international travel. But we're all hoping that things are going to turn a corner and get a lot better over the late spring and early summer.
Yeah, I feel you. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate you so much. And for the folks who are asking, yes, if you're on this webinar, you're on the email list, you're going to get a follow-up email with some really practical resources. And then next week, and again, if you sign up for this one, you're signed up for this. You're signed up for next week's. I'm going to get super practical. So if you're stressed about X, Y, and Z, I think it's like what are the things that we can control? And I'm going to map out for y'all in terms of your application. What can you be working on right now? What should you be working on right now? What are some things you can start thinking about in terms of essays? And you're going to come away from that with a crap ton, as my daughter says, of action items and lots of specific things that you can focus on. So this webinar was more sort of like thinking about big picture or, what are the changes that we're seeing? Next one is going to be really focused on the practical. So I hope to see y'all there. Again, thank you, Susan. You're the best. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
And I'll see y'all next week. Bye.